JobPro gives you the ability to track stock or assets or customer assets by serial number. So the units module is the place that anything that has a serial number, in other words it's a unit, a quantity of one, it then gets stored in that module. So let's take a quick look. So a unit or an asset can be introduced into the system in a number of ways. For example, if you're purchasing items on a PO and those items are tracked by serial number, so when you receive the items, you're prompted to specify the serial numbers for those items, which you can either specify automatically or manually. So the system can generate serial numbers for you, or you can manually put in the serial numbers either using a barcode scanner or just typing them in based on the products you've received. So on the receiving of a PO, it will generate separate records for each individual quantity of one that has a unique serial number, and they'll exist in this module here. Now normally you'll access individual items through various ways, like for example if you sell goods and then on a shipping record it might prompt you to specify with what serial numbers, what items are you using on that shipping out record, and that will then update the unit itself to show that it's now been sold, for example. Here's an example here of a particular item that it originally came from a PO, but it actually was a PO that was drop shipped straight to the customer. So it was never brought into stock in this system here. And we can see then that the customer is this particular company. The current location is not obviously an internal location, it's with the customer. And that the only movement or history for this is the actual original PO. But in some cases you'll have purchased items, you'll see the original PO, then maybe you'll have transferred items between different locations, you'd see that movement here, and then maybe on a sales invoice or on a shipping record it would show when it was sold to the customer. So those sort of items in the units module are items that you'd be selling. But you can also purchase items that you might be using internally for your own use, in your own offices for example, or also items that you might use on jobs and tasks as resources, like assets, tools or other equipment, anything at all that you need to be able to track and book in on a resource. So you can use assets for bookings. Now all that sort of functionality is covered in other video tutorials relating to jobs and tasks and resource management as well. But here we can see where this particular item was used on a specific job for maintenance purposes. And you can also create a booking for an item on a job or a task from here as well. So any item in the units or assets module will have been generated from elsewhere, as mentioned on receiving a PO, or potentially if you assemble finished products from raw materials like components, well then in a job assembly, when you finish the assembly, that will actually create units where you need to specify the serial number of those finished items, and they'll be added into the units module as well. So the products module is an area that any item that is in a unit, it will have its parent record in the products module. So for example, any equipment that you sell, any products that you use on jobs for example, like tools or other equipment, you'll set up a parent record in the products module. And from there, there's a number of ways that you can then generate and have in stock unit items or assets relating to that product. So let's create a quick example here. We'll create a new product. And we'll set it just to be some sort of sample equipment item that you're going to use on jobs. And we could say in here now you can specify the different types that you'd like to see in this list. You can edit those and set up. We might want to specify who the supplier is for this item. and also that we track this item in stock and we also track it by serial numbers. So that's already set up, because in setup for products, that's the default for this system here, but you can change those defaults as well. So now if we want to introduce the actual serial numbers that we have in stock for this item, let's say we're putting in the opening balances and you're starting to use the system for the first time. Well, what you can do is, on the stock tab, you can create an amendment, and we can specify that, for example, in the main stock location, we've got a quantity of 5 of these items. So we can specify the serial number here. Now we've actually brought 5 of these items into a stock location where its usage is a sell location. So let's just say that we've got 5 of these items that we sell, but we might also have items that we use on jobs or for rental use, like renting out to customers. So let's create another location here for this item, and we'll say it's the rental stores location, and that we always have, or currently have, a quantity of 3 at that location. So we'll generate the serial numbers automatically for those. Now we could put in our own serial numbers on that screen as well. So now we've got 5 in the sell location and 3 in the rental location. In total we've got 8. And if we look at the units or serials tab relating to this item, we can see then, in this case we're looking at the 3 because there's a filter and it's currently set to anything for loan or rental use. But if we clear that filter, we can see then all the units that are in the system and their current location as well. If we want to view any of these individual items, we can just click on the arrow, and we can see that this item was added into the system using an amendment, like an opening balance, and its current location is rental stores location. So we could then use this item for a booking on a job. We would go in and create a job for this item. We'd specify who the customer is. And on the resources tab, you can see that this item has been booked in as a resource. And we can put in the dates required, the start and finish times. And we can also specify for an item in the units module, or actually at the product parent level, if we're going to rent out these items for jobs or tasks to, say, customers, if we look at the pricing tab, we can put in a rate per hour, rate per day, or rate per booking. So any then of these items that are rented out, it'll default to the correct rental rates from that area in the products module. Units can also be tagged to batches as well. Now that functionality is also covered in other video tutorials. But it's worth noting that when you increase stock for a particular item that's tracked by serial number, by units, at that time of receiving the goods into stock, or whether you're assembling or manufacturing those goods and putting them into stock, you can generate a batch number at that point. So then you'd see what items are linked to what batch, and you could go and view the batch record and see what the original quantity was for that batch, what's been sold or used up, and what the balance is remaining. So a unit is something that you can either sell, or it could be something that you're tracking internally, like your own assets, your own computer equipment in different offices, for example. So they'll all be tied to a location that would be, an internal location, like an office or a studio or whatever it might be. But also, units, as mentioned, can be rentable items, or items that you're going to use on jobs or tasks as resources. Now the other area that the units module gets used for is, for example, if you sell a particular item to a customer, well then the current location for that item will be actually with the customer, and it'll be basically a customer asset at that point. So the use for this is that if you need to do service or maintenance jobs on equipment or anything that you sell to customers, you would use this functionality. So you'd have the ability then on the customer screen. So let's go in and find a customer. And if we look at the products tab for this particular customer here, over on the right hand side we can see all the different equipment that has been sold to that customer. And if we want to create a service or maintenance job from here, we can do that by clicking on the plus button. And it'll automatically then link that item, customer owned item, to the job, where you can then specify on the resources tab if you're going to, book in a person to do that repair or service as well. But there's another scenario where a customer might contact you with a piece of equipment that you actually haven't sold to them, so it may not already be in the system. And what you can do in this scenario is that you can create or introduce a customer asset by clicking on the plus button here on the customer screen. So when you do that, it'll then prompt you to say what parent product record is this linked to, and if there isn't one already here, then you'll need to set up a product record for that item that you're going to be servicing. So then we've created a new unit or asset record for that customer where you can put in the serial number of the item. We can see that it's originally from the customer, and we can click on the customer from here as well. But also we could book that in from here on a job, or we could go back to the customer screen and do it from there. Now you also have the ability to introduce new assets into the system directly from the products module. So it doesn't have to be, for example, if you're receiving goods on a PO or if you're assembling finished products. But back on the product screen, on the units or serials tab, you can also create a new unit from here. And when you do that, if you've got multiple locations, multiple stock locations in the system, which we have in this example, you'll then need to specify which location this unit is going to be part of. So let's just take a location here called Studio 5, and in this case, because we've specified this product to auto enter serial numbers, it's going to do that for us. And now we can see that that item has been introduced into stock at that location. Let's take a quick look at when on receiving a PO where we can assign a set of serial numbers to a batch. So from this record here, we go to purchasing and we create a PO, which you can do in multiple ways. You can create a PO from the supplier line. You can also create a PO specific to a location. So let's create a PO linked to the main stock location. So on the line entry tab, it's automatically put the item in, and we can then specify the quantity. The location up here is defaulted to the main stock location, but you can actually change it from here if you've got the access privilege to do so. If you don't have multiple stock locations, well then throughout the system you won't actually see these stock location fields and you won't have a need to change them. But now let's receive this purchase order. So we're prompted to say that we're going to then need to put in basically the serial numbers, so we click continue. And on this screen it's going to generate the serial numbers automatically, but let's assign these to a new batch. We can put in a batch description if we like, and then click on create. So now it's saying that it's going to add 5 items into the system. We click generate. So that then deals with the purchase order. If we go back to the products module, we can see the purchase order we created. We can see the units that we just created there, the 5 serial numbers. And we can also see that they're linked to this batch here. If we look at the batches tab, we can see the batch that was just created. So we have a couple of ways of going directly into that batch. By clicking the arrow here, or back on the Units tab, we can click the arrow here, and we're brought straight into the Batches module for that sample batch, where we can see then the 5 serial numbers linked to this batch, and that there hasn't been any sold or used yet relating to this batch. And we can see that the batch was created from a PO as well. And if we want to go to any of the individual items linked to this batch, we can click on the arrow, and then we're back into the Units module, where we can see any of the history relating to this particular item. Originally from a PO, its current stock location, and if an item was out on a booking, well then it would show that the current location is on a specific job number. And you do have the ability when on a job, when you're changing the status of a resource booking to complete, it will prompt you to see if you're actually returning the item to its location. For example, in some cases an item might end up being used or lost on a job. So if you specify on the completion of the use of an asset or an item on a job that it isn't being returned, well then it removes it from stock, and it also then will create an expense item on that job, which then you can use if you want to invoice out that cost to the customer. So from the asset or unit screen, we've got various methods of getting to other parts of the system, like viewing its parent product record, viewing the place that it came from, which in this case it's a PO, viewing its current location, and its standard location, which in this case it's the same thing. Or if it was a customer owned product at this point, you'd have a link to the customer, and we've also got a link to go and view the batch record that it's related to. And also here we can go and view the product movement itself. So we can see that it was part of a product movement where 5 items came into stock. And you do actually have the ability with a product movement to print that movement, including the barcode. So that can be useful as well, especially if it's outgoing stock product movements, where you can use that like a picking list. And also for a unit or an asset, you can put in multiple notes and any other communications relating to that, like could be internal messages to other JobPro users relating to this item. And then we've got the bookings tab. So if this item is something that you rent out or loan out or use on a job, you can then create a booking for that as a resource on a job. And also the tasks module has the same resource functionality where you can book items on a task. So any items, or this item has been booked on any jobs or tasks, you'd see the records in here with the ability to go and view those jobs or tasks. So on the list screen in the units, you can use this to pull up a found set of units and sort them, and maybe print off a list of units as well. So just to recap and finish off about the units module, items in here could be items that you sell. Everything in here is tracked by serial number though. So they can be items that you sell. They can be your own internal assets that you use internally, like in your offices. They can be items, again assets, that you use for rental or loan purposes or use on jobs and tasks, for example. But items in here can also be customer assets. So assets that you may need to do maintenance or service on or just track. And those items could have originally been in the system as items that you sold to the customer, or they can also be introduced as customer items that they introduce into the system. So that covers the units or assets functionality in JobPro.